Okay, so we continue. This is a triple album set, actually, of Todd Rundgren's and Utopia's first three albums of the 80s. There's Adventures in Utopia, which was their big hit album, which had a song called Set Me Free on it. Very pop, dance, new wave sort of oriented album. And there's a song on there I love called Second Nature, which is one of Todd's greatest songs he's probably ever written. And Deface the Music. Now, this was an album where it's sort of like a Ruddles collection. They redo Beatles songs. Well, there's not Beatles songs. They are original Todd Rundgren Utopia songs that are written in the style of the Beatles. And it starts out from their early 60s material and goes into the Let It Be era. It's kind of like the Ruddles set. There's a good song on there. I believe it's called, Hoi Polloi, which is a very good look at the Sgt. Pepper era. And Swing to the Right is a very 80s funk, new wave oriented album where they do a cover of For the Love of Money and a song called Fahrenheit 451. There's a lot of socially consciousness songs on that and a lot of heavy rockers too. I apologize, I hate to present broken jewel cases, but there's the back cover of what would have been the Adventures in Utopia album, and the inside of it. Put that over there. Now, this album brought Todd into a different place. Apparently, in 1980, after John Lennon was killed, Todd and his family were held up in their house by a burglar who was convinced that, Todd had some play in John Lennon's upsetting murder, and was taunting him with his own song, I Saw the Light. And Todd was very, very shaken by this experience, needless to say, and wrote this album called The Healing. I suppose today you would call it a dedication to New Age healing, but this is some of his most elaborate and significant music ever. Huge washes of melodic synthesizer, kind of progressive, but sort of new wave too. Time Heals was a hit song. It wasn't really on this album. It was a 45 that I believe came with it, but it's on the CD. And it sounds almost exactly like a Hall & Oates song. And it was in, actually, that video to that song, Time Heals, was actually one of the first videos to be played on MTV when the network first came out. My favorite song on here are Pulse, Flesh, and Shine really has a lot of wonderful tempo changes and parts to it. This is an amazing album, and it's not too obtuse. I mean, it's written conceptually so that anybody could understand it. It's not really the least bit pretentious, at least I don't find it to be so. And in that sense, it might actually change the life of somebody who's had a near-death experience like Todd did then, or has been going through a depression. Very therapeutic, without being silly or pretentious at all. Now, this is not actually of the same sort as another CD. It's a Japanese vinyl replica of his album called the ever-popular Tortured Artist Effect from 1983. It's a contractual obligation set. As you can see, he's making his feelings very clear on this. This is actually one of his most consistently wonderful albums from a pop context. Very new wave, very influenced by Minneapolis. Hideaway was another song that was very popular from this. And another song I love is called There Goes My Baby, which is a very kind of jazzy funk number from this album. And the album's closer, Chant, which is very heavily new wave influenced. Very good pop album, kind of his 80s version of Herman at Mink Hollow, really. Now, this is the album that got me into Rundgren, actually. He releases in 1985 when he had the Synclavier. And the album is entirely recorded with Todd's own voice and his body, enhanced with Synclavier. And there are some absolutely amazing songs on this album. Here's the back. Blue Orpheus is an absolute rhythmic explosion. And Lost Horizon, with its channeling of Marvin Gaye, Leon Ware, Michael Henderson, it may very well be one of the greatest songs written in all of pop. One I very much encourage you to hear. Very wonderful expression of emotion, very beautiful musical passages, very melodic, very colonial, simple, just brilliant. Something to Fall Back On is very much a variation of his Something Anything era. It's a fantastic album. I'd highly recommend it. A lot of Rundgren fans don't care for it, but I think it's brilliant. I think it's absolutely brilliant. He took a break from recording after breaking up Utopia in the mid-80s, and I don't have a lot of the Utopia mid-80s albums, and recorded this record in 1989 with a band called Nearly Human. It's rather commercial, basically sounds like a Hall & Oates kind of soul rock record, but it's very good. Actually, if you want to get into Todd Rundgren in this era, this is a very easy way to get into him. Very similar kind of album from 1991. Second Wind. It's the 90s, but you know, it's not all hip-hop and alternative noise influenced. It's very much still in his 80s frame of mind. I believe it's the same band. Another highly recommended album of his from that era. Now this record was a very big mystery. It's called No World Order, and it's composed of a number of odd cuts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 16, 17 cuts. Some of them are actually songs and some of them are little tidbits. And the reason for that is that this album was meant to be used with a software called CDI, which allowed a person using a computer to recombine these songs and remix them in various combinations. It was re-released later as New World Order Lite, but this is the original album, and again, it's a broken jewel case, which I bought it in. I need to replace that. It has some interesting early CGI, sperm-based artwork. This album is very, very highly political. It embraces some of the, industrial kind of sounds of the 90s. I think it's about the closest Todd ever came to a Nine Inch Nails kind of release. A little darker. I like some of it, but some of it's, so-so. And he called himself TRI on this album, and I think, the 90s were a little bit hard for a lot of artists, and kind of hard on, I think, Todd in some ways. My personal opinion, not everybody's. This is another CDI album, The Individualist, again credited to TRI, because of the CDI technology. This album is a bit better, I think, in a lot of ways, because it's more melodic, and it's a cross between Second Wind and the previous album. Open it up to see the inside of it there. It's only 10 songs, and it isn't all that long. Now this is an album that Todd did about 3 or 4 years ago called Johnson, and as a tribute to the blues singer Robert Johnson. This album is really heavily guitar oriented, very hard rock, very hard, on the hardest edge of blues rock. It's okay, but it's not the Todd Rundgren I know. Now this is his most recent album. Okay, and I have to admit, I didn't care for this too much. I mean, it's Todd Rundgren kind of trying to get back to his sound, but like No World Order, he is really too heavily involved in the electro-pop, noise, overly electronic sound. And I'm not against electronics at all, but it's not used in an organic fashion. It sounds a little bit teeny bopper, to be honest with you, musically. I mean, Todd's compositions and his lyrics are always Todd, and if these were redone, they'd be brilliant, but I don't really care for the music personally, and that's all I have to say about that. I mean, I may revise my opinion later, but right now this is not my favorite Todd Rundgren album at all. And so basically, he's an artist that, very much in tune with being a Gemini, like with Prince, either hit or really, really, really miss. But I always want to hear what he's up to. I always do. And I usually end up revising my opinion of things by him that I don't care much for. And this and Johnson are the only ones that I'm a little bit mixed on. But anyway, happy birthday, Todd. And keep making your music. We all enjoy it. Well, I do anyway, and so do a lot of other people. Happy birthday, Todd.